Welcome back to the Catholic History Show. I'm Brendan Lane, and I can't tell you how excited I am to be back and how excited I am to share the upcoming videos that I have planned. I think you're really going to enjoy some of the topics. But today, I'm obviously shooting out of my wood shop, and I'm going to shoot a video here today on the Jerusalem Cross, which is also, you may know, is also known as the Crusader Cross. I wanted to do a video on the history of the Jerusalem Cross for a couple of reasons. Personally, I've had some interesting experiences in relation to this cross, and so I thought, personally, I would really enjoy doing this. But mainly because the history of the Jerusalem Cross is actually pretty fascinating, and it touches on a period in Catholic history that is not known very well. So, as you may be able to see behind me, I have a version of the Jerusalem Cross that I actually make in my wood shop, and if you're interested in getting one of these guys, you can go on the Facebook page for my woodworking business, which is Crusade Woodworking, and all the proceeds obviously go to my family, but this helps me make more videos on Catholic history. So if you think this is pretty cool, actually what it is it's a rosary stand that you can put your rosaries or your crucifixes on during like the nighttime when you go to bed. So you get it blessed by a priest, and then you put it up in your room, and that's where you put your rosary, so we're not just tossing it in drawers and things like that. Not that anyone does that. But anyways, it's available for sale on my Crusade Woodworking Facebook. So check out the link in the bottom of this video if you're interested in purchasing one. They're like $49.99. And going forward, I'll make more versions of this cross because of the fascinating history behind it and how much I actually love making this cross. Okay, so back to the history though. The history of this cross really begins in 1095 when Urban II was at the Council of Claremont. Now, if you know anything about Catholic history, one of the big periods in Catholic history is obviously the Crusades. And at the Council of Claremont in 1095, Pope Urban decided to give one of the most epic speeches in salvation history. And he called on the princes of Europe to rally around the cross and to take that cross to the Levant. Now, this is what we know as the Crusades, and the word crusade actually comes down to us from French, croisé, but which comes from Latin crux, meaning cross. The French croisé actually means being marked with the cross. And another interesting fact about the Council of Claremont, it was here that Pope Urban II codified into canon law, quote, the Day of the Ashes, specifically from the canons of the council, quote, no layman shall eat meat after the imposition of ashes on Ash Wednesday until Easter, end quotation. As is usual in the history of the church feast, obviously Ash Wednesday had been celebrated widely around Christendom before the Council of Claremont, but it was at Claremont that we get the Crusade called, and also Ash Wednesday is recognized and promoted by the Bishop of Rome, which I think is a really interesting connection between the two things, the taking on of the cross and the actual crusade to the Holy Land. Now, how the Jerusalem Cross fits into the history of the Crusade is a little murky, and if there's more interest about the Crusades, I'm going to do more videos. Actually, I'm planning on doing more videos about the Crusades, so if there is no interest, I'm sorry, there will be more videos. Anyways, but I'll make a couple of general comments about the Crusades today. If you want to read one of the dumbest histories about the Crusades, go to history.com, which is the History Channel website, and read their synthesis of the Holy Wars. It's pretty horrible, and it's based in bigotry that comes to us from our Protestant friends, but regardless, the Crusades are greatly misunderstood in our times, and mainly because we no longer live in a time when Christendom is present as a part of the secular powers in the world. But in the late 11th century, this wasn't the case, obviously. The nation-state had not yet fully been defined in Europe. However, the institution of the church was pretty clearly recognized. The men and women of Europe were united. They were galvanized by the reality that Jesus Christ was the incarnate God, that he died and that he rose from the dead, and that he established his invisible as well as his visible church, and that he made Peter its earthly head. Now, for a Roman Catholic, it's pretty easy to romanticize these times. You will see this if you go on Twitter, on more traditional accounts. And for good reason, too. This is a beautiful time in the church's history. But they were sinners just like us, and they had serious societal and clerical problems just like us. However, they lived in a society and a civilization based on the tenets of the church. And that civilization existed from Charlemagne to Napoleon, nearly 1,000 years. It was this society that led to one of the greatest expeditions in human history. And that, of course, was the Crusades. Now, there are, of course, like I said earlier, many misconceptions about the Crusades. And one of the most widespread and one of the most heinous is to look at Crusading Europe and see the Europe of 17th and 18th centuries. That Europe was technologically far more advanced than all other civilizations, that it walked into foreign countries and brings them into submission in order to strip them of their natural resources and, of course, enslave the local populace. I mean, this is a pretty bad misconception because if you hold it, you are actually, in fact, a bigot. It comes to us from historians and scholars, supposed historians and scholars, looking at the Catholic Church and Catholic faith and Catholic Europe, and literally lying about who they were. In 1095, Europe was not technologically more advanced than the Mohammedan lands where they were going to invade. They weren't wealthier, they weren't better off in any way. But the Crusades did have several advantages, which I'll talk about in another day. However, their advantages were not the advantages of European nations of the later colonial period and later centuries. So if you look at the Crusades and you see the colonial period of the, what we're familiar with in the 16 and 1700s, you're not understanding it correctly. So I just wanted to kind of clear up that misconception before I kind of get into the history of the cross. The Crusades were not a holy war based on greed, lust, hate. No, they were literally men carrying the cross to a pagan land in order to stop the heinous crimes that were being committed by the Mohammedan. So I just want to make that clear. It's a misconception. We should not be looking at the Crusades that way. I'm not saying that there weren't atrocities that took place. There, of course, were. Like I said, we're sinners. Sinners do bad things. But look at our society today. We commit terrible atrocities, abortion, and yet we hope that when the world looks back on us, they don't see the terrible sins of our past, but they can look at us and say, there were men and women that were trying to do the right thing and carry the cross to further generations. Anyways, what does any of this have to do with the Jerusalem cross? Well, one of the principal leaders of the Crusade was Godfrey of Bouillon. And when Jerusalem fell to the Crusaders in 1099, I'm skipping a lot of history, but just trying to get to the cross. When the Crusaders took Jerusalem in 1099, Godfrey was made the de facto king of the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem. It's kind of a long title. But anyway, traditionally, it was he who carried the Jerusalem cross given to him by Pope Urban II before he left Europe. And he carried it into Jerusalem with him. Now, when his grave was excavated in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, it is said that the Crusader Cross, or the Jerusalem Cross, was found within his tomb. And I really need to do a video on Godfrey because he's just one of the most amazing Catholic Crusaders. But he's actually the traditional source of the cross. Now, there are modern scholars today that debate this fact, but I don't really care. Because it's such a great story. You see all the great images of Godfrey marching in the crusade, going to war with the Mohammedan, and he's carrying this amazing cross. In any event, this cross was definitely used during the Crusader states in the Middle Ages, and it really becomes the symbol of all of the Crusades. So, the imagery of the cross is actually interesting too. Of course, you see there's one major cross, and then you have four smaller ones. The four smaller ones often are used to represent the four Gospels, or also the four directions on the map where the Gospel is spread to from Jerusalem. But when you hear the word crusade, when we present ourselves for ashes on Ash Wednesday, we should really be thinking about this cross. This is the cross that represents the evangelical nature of the church, us going out to defend, protect, and spread the word of God. And that's the history of this cross. I think it's really interesting. Like I said, I'm going to do more videos on the Crusades. And if you're interested, please definitely subscribe and like this video, and I will see you next time.